Hey, I'm Ryan.
Donna Bowman.
Nice to meet you, Donna.
Nice to meet you.
Christy Austin.
I'm a professor in the Shedler Honors College at the University of Central Arkansas here, and I'm a theologian. My degree is in philosophical theology from the University of Virginia, but I teach interdisciplinary studies here at the Honors College.
I am the co-pastor at First Christian Church in Searcy, Arkansas, and in September we'll start my second year of training to be a spiritual director.
Mm-hmm.
I am a professor of communication and theater at ASU Beebe Junior College here in Arkansas. I'm also the co-pastor at First Christian Church in Searcy and an alumnus of Harding University in 1991. Graduating from Harding in the early 90s, we were trying to find our way theologically with the LGBT question. And 5.5 years ago, I came back to Searcy after spending 25 years in ministry within Churches of Christ. And I came back as a divorced and remarried guy. Mm-hmm. And that left me feeling very much on the outside of the conversation in Searcy. People that had been my friends and we had gone to college together were not interested in me anymore. And I began to realize through conversations with others that there were a lot of folks in Searcy who felt on the outside looking in. And so I helped to found a group called the Searcy Outsiders, which has been an important outreach for me personally to help young people who feel marginalized in one way or another, specifically more often than not because they're a member of the LGBT community, and to create a safe haven for them as a church and even as a small group of people to surround them in what is still a very southern religious community where that question has not been decided for a lot of people. And so I see myself as an advocate for those students, and they are the age of my own son, and so that is a doubly important thing for me. And we have been able, I think, to create a safe place for them. So it's awfully important to me. A lot of my friends who came through Harding when I did were not able to, they were forced to choose life of faith or be gay. There was no opportunity to be gay and maintain a life of faith. And I'm trying to create a reality and a space where people can integrate those two concepts together. So that's extremely important to me as we consider this conversation, is how can those two coexist?
My husband was in the Air Force. He got out in 98, so that was right square in the middle of Don't Ask, Don't Tell. And our home became kind of a safe place for gay airmen. Then when he got out of the Air Force, we landed in a very fundamentalist evangelical church. And so what I heard about gay people in the church did not match with what I knew, my practical experience of gay people from when my husband was in the Air Force. And so that was always kind of a split for me. I couldn't match what I was being told with what my heart told me. And then the more I got to know, and I think especially as a woman who was told, you know, you don't pray out loud, it causes your husband to feel insecure, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Mm-hmm. I knew what was in my heart as far as what I wanted, as far as teaching and that sort of thing. Those things were not given to me because, specifically because I was a woman. So I can identify to some degree with the feeling of being on the outside. And mostly, I just see people's hearts. I don't care what they do behind closed doors. They deserve to be treated like humans. So,
Well, listening to you all, I realized some things about my answer to the question of how we got here that I probably wouldn't have come up with without hearing your stories. I think the start of my different understanding of issues about LGBTQ people was with my dissertation director, who was a gay man, and a Thomas Aquinas scholar, a Karl Barth scholar. And understanding his life as a scholar with a deep understanding of Christian history, of issues of law and justice and morality from a theological point of view, gave me a perspective on the ways you can be fully human and not be completely identified simply by a category of sexuality. I think that may have been the start for me. That's pretty late in life, me in my 20s, but I lived a pretty sheltered life growing up. Thinking about something I think a lot of people start to understand about their growing up in church experience, that your music minister, your organist, your people who do a lot of things behind the scenes in the church maybe, people that it's sort of an open secret, but nobody wants to claim an identity because it will cause a moral issue and we'll have to exercise some sort of judgment, so we'll just pretend, right? It's also a very Southern thing, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yes.
That we do that. But then it was my students, beginning to be a teacher, beginning to see students in the South opening up to you about those struggles they have with family, with church, realizing that this is a deep part of themselves, not something they chose on a whim, not something that they can just bootstrap their way out of, just coming to an awareness of what that experience is like for them and caring about them as human beings, right? And then I think you talked about your students being the same age as your children, and that's true. My daughter has a heart for this issue, a heart for her classmates and her online friends and those people who are struggling in that way. And that sensitized me a great deal, seeing it through her eyes.
I was raised Methodist, but I have been just about everything. I've been Baptist. I've been Church of Christ. I've been non-denominational, some form of Pentecostal. I think I spent a lot of time, because of my family of origin, trying to find something that would fix things. And so everybody had the answer. So that's where I landed. I was done with church when I landed at FCC. So done. My atheist friend invited me to church. And it's been a place where I could find my faith again. And, it all started with Ragamuffin Gospel, Brennan Manning's Ragamuffin Gospel. And that was the first place where I thought, oh my God, there's people that don't believe like we do, despite the fact that we're being told this is the only way to believe. And so it's just been this Hansel and Gretel trail of this leads to this, and this leads to this, and this leads to this. And I think the thing that was the final death blow to the whole LGBT issue for me was understanding and knowing how much God loves me. And just naturally that extends to other people. if God loves me when I know the worst there is to know about me, then that also extends to others. And it just wasn't a question anymore. It just wasn't a question anymore. So.
Me. I definitely grew up in a small Church of Christ in Orrville, Ohio. And both of my grandfathers were Church of Christ elders. My maternal grandfather, it was his great goal in my life that he would mold me into a minister. So when I was baptized at 10, they had this massive pulpit, and I was short then and still am, and I could not be seen behind it. So he built this box, I don't remember how big it was, but so that I could stand, and the week after I was baptized, he had me in the pulpit. So that story runs very deep for me. I grew up asking questions. In a Bible class in about 4th grade, somewhere along in there, we were discussing Jesus on the cross and the 2 criminals, and I just was startled awake, and I said to my teacher, wait, we believe you have to be baptized, right? And his eyes grew wary, very wary immediately. And he said, yes. And I said, but this guy said to Jesus, remember me. And Jesus said that he would that very day. And I don't see anything here about baptism. It's an emergency elders meeting about questions being raised by the young people in church, i.e. me. And I learned in that moment that questions were not supposed to be asked, maybe. And so I went to the church library. I was the only young person that checked out books from the library. And I became friends with the Church of Christ preacher's son in the next town. And so I went to him from there on when I had questions, because it was less dangerous than asking the guy in my own church. And so in 7th grade, I think, I was deeply troubled about the rapture. And so I went to this guy and I said, are we pre, post, or amillennial? And he looked at me like I had 3 heads. Like, why is this junior high kid asking me about it? I was deeply concerned about it. I was just deeply concerned. I wanted to understand what my people believed, what I was supposed to believe. And so that led to 1987 when I became a student at Harding University, and I was in the Harding Chorale, and we performed for a church on Sunday night during Sunday night church, which in my hometown was sacrosanct, and there were ways that happened, and there were ways that didn't happen, and at the end someone stood up and said, if anyone hasn't had the opportunity to take communion this morning that's still prepared in room, I don't remember, 214 or whatever it was, you can go there. And so we went and we did our program, and they closed church, and this entertainment was church. I was stricken. I was pretty sure I was going to burn in hell. That is the place from which I came. And a senior in the choir asked me why I was so stricken, and I said, I just thought that was a dumb question, because everyone I knew would know why everything we did was wrong. And then he asked me if I wanted to study the Bible about it. I also thought that was a ludicrous proposition. Everyone I knew would know why that was wrong, and why do we need to visit the Bible for that? But he seemed earnest, so I went to the Harding University Library, and I pulled down every concordance off the walls, and could not find a single reference to Sunday night church. And at 17 years of age, I remember sort of pushing back from the table at the library, like, so what bill of goods have I been sold here? What are we doing? And ironically, I got divorced and followed a woman to Searcy to restart my life in Searcy for the second time. I got here, and immediately someone said, well, I'll have to leave this wife to go back to the other one, or you're committing adultery. And in that moment, I realized in a religious community like Searcy how easy it is to feel like an outsider. In that moment, it was painfully clear. And I realized that was probably what God was calling me to. And that's kind of been the last 5+ years of my life has been doing that. But I'm familiar with I guess I'm most familiar really with the Churches of Christ and that lens of looking at Scripture in the world.
It reminds me of Youth Sunday
Yeah.
at my
Yeah.
Southern Baptist church where I grew up, where it occurred to me watching my older brother, preach
Yeah.
on Youth Sunday that we never had any girls preach
Oh, imagine that.
on Youth Sunday. And I think it occurred to me then, in a way, it never occurred to me watching adults preach because I knew the pool of people from whom that was drawn. And it suddenly occurred to me, that pool of people, they're only drawing from half of that pool. There's a whole group of people who are ineligible in that pool. And we're not talking about that. That was interesting. Southern Baptist, yeah. That's how I grew up, in a large Southern Baptist church in Chattanooga, Tennessee. Large enough, probably, 1,000 people every Sunday. Not a mega church because that wasn't invented yet. But our service was televised on the local, one of the 3 local channels. That was back when we just had 3 channels. And I remember really always being very happy that our church was televised because it wasn't televised live, or actually maybe it was, I can't remember, but it was timed, right? So there were these lights on top of the camera, and it never went beyond, the altar call had to happen at 10:29 a.m. because that's when the service was, that's when the time slot was over. So church never ran long. We were always out in time for a good Sunday dinner. But we were the family that was, there every time the doors were open, proverbially, right? Sunday morning, Sunday night, Wednesday night. My dad was, who's a CPA, was the treasurer of the church. My mom was the leader of all the women's groups. I taught Sunday school. I taught adult Sunday school as a teenager. They were super impressed with me. Why don't you teach this? Why don't you teach this class? So we were the kids, and we were the golden children, and everybody thought we were fantastic. We were part of the life of the church, and but I had the misfortune of growing up with a dad who said, "You kids can do and be anything you want." He never put limits on our ambition or our creativity. So I went away to college thinking I was going to be a writer, but I took classes in religion at Wake Forest University, required classes in religion, and they talked about the Bible in a way that I had never heard anybody talk about the Bible before. And it was fascinating that there was, and that's what I used to do in church. I used to sit in church, and when I was too old to bring comic books into church and read or whatever, I could always read the Bible. You never got in trouble for reading the Bible. So I would sit there during boring sermons and read the Old Testament. Yeah. The Old Testament's so awesome. There were all this stuff in there that nobody ever preached from.
Yeah.
Right? Stuff where the moral lesson was not clear. The religious lesson was not clear. And then I took these classes in college, and there were things you could do with that material. There was understanding of that material that wasn't just, again, God put it there to speak to me. It had this larger cultural, historical, literary meaning. And I became obsessed. I had to find out everything I could about this larger world that had opened up to me through the academic study of religion. And they always warn kids, if you go to college and find out what they're saying about religion, they're trying to destroy your faith. And they weren't trying to destroy my faith, but as happens with a lot of kids, they did a pretty good job of it despite not trying, right? And the reason why that happens is the same reason kids grow up and away from their parents in a lot of ways, because we find out that for our own good, our parents have lied to us.
Right.
Yeah.
That for our own good, our parents have hidden things from us.
Yeah.
Not to complicate our lives.
Yeah.
And I found that people have been lying to me about the history of my faith, about the scripture of my faith, about the larger world in which my faith existed.
Yep.
And that destroyed my faith for a few years there in college, until I got it back in grad school through a different intellectual understanding of theology, through a professor who said, well, yeah, these problems are really insoluble unless you realize that the assumptions you're thinking are unchallengeable actually are challengeable. We can start from different assumptions about who God is and what God's power consists of, what God's character consists of, what human beings are, what our history is. And I realized that all those things I'd taken for granted as the bedrock knowledge actually had a lot of assumptions and history built into them, right? And so that enabled me to rebuild and re-embrace, which is so important to me, re-embrace my upbringing, re-embrace Christ and Christianity, where I spent a few years there thinking I'd never be able to do that. And so that's been the great joy of my life, is being able to bring, to not to have to leave a part of myself behind. Like a lot of our students do. A lot of our students really feel like I have no choice but to leave a big piece of myself behind. And some people do have to do that because they have deep pain and deep hurt and deep alienation and trauma associated with that part of their lives. But if they can find another way into it, to embrace it and make that still part of themselves, I think that's great grace and blessing, and that's been my experience.
So I know that you're not Baptist anymore.
That's right.
So maybe you can tell us a little bit more about that.
Sure. I discovered the Episcopal Church because my husband's father was a second career Episcopal priest after being a country musician and a DJ for his main part of his life. Yeah. He went to seminary and became a priest and married us, along with a televangelist from my parents' church. So I had two ministers who represented very different sides of these two lives, the past and the future that I was going into. And we definitely embraced the Episcopal Church, as many people do, when our children were born. Wanting them to be raised in a Christian community was important to us. And the Episcopal Church appealed to me because its origin is in avoiding theological definitiveness, right? Mm-hmm. Avoiding theological conflict in the name of community, of practice. Mm-hmm. So to be a community of practice that does church together, that does liturgy together, that does prayer together, that does service together, but knowing that I'm sitting in the pew next to someone who might have a very different theological understanding of everything that's going on, that to me was like, yes, there's always going to be a home for me here, no matter what I think following Christ means in terms of belief, because we have a model to all follow Christ as practice. So that's why I became an Episcopal.
Christy, did you ever think you'd be disciples of Christ?
I didn't think I'd ever be anything.
That was actually kind of the next talking point. Was like, how did you manage not to throw the baby out with the bathwater?
Yeah.
Right.
So fed up with what you learned before.
How did I manage not to throw the baby out with the bathwater? I'm not sure that is an answered question yet.
I'm not sure you have it yet.
No. No matter my change in theology, I know that there is somebody out there. I have felt the unction, for lack of a better word. I have felt the resonance, and that is the thing that draws me back over and over and over again. My understanding of faith as this list of things that we believe in definitively, as you said, no longer exists. That's not what faith is to me. Faith is trust in that thing, that person, that as far as, I guess in a way, if you're asking me, do I believe in the God that is presented most of the time by the evangelical fundamental church, then I would say no, I do not. But my understanding of who God is, there is this thing in Christ that I've never been able to turn loose of. This understanding that somebody loves me enough to do what was done on our behalf. That is the baby that I have not been able to toss. There's other things that I have definitely tossed, but that brings me back over and over and over again. The goodness of love God, love your neighbor, grace, mercy. Those are the things that I've never been able to walk away from. So.
I made some choices after being fired from a church. They were hard choices. They were not. They were life altering. And I don't have very many God spoke to me stories. That's a sort of an uncomfortable moment for me, but I have this one where I realized that the choices I was making were going to land me outside rather than inside. And you said something that I had always been the golden boy at church. In fact, one of my friend's mothers wants me to do her funeral, not him, and he's also a pastor. I was used to being that, and so it was a very difficult and different experience to be the guy feeling like he was on the outside. And in that moment, I felt, I guess, a Saul on the road moment where God was saying, I'm gonna put you in a different place for a different purpose, doing different things. And so from that moment, when I told him no, I was not interested in his plan. Those details began to work themselves out. And we started going to this crazy little church, and we had a family the dad had taken up long haul trucking, and they had these 4 super rambunctious children. I came into the church building on Wednesday night, and I could hear the youngest screaming at the top of his lungs. I had never heard a child scream that loud in my life. The mom was down. She had her hand on the door of the nursery, and it was just a bad picture. I walked down and said, could I do anything? And she said, if you can do anything, great. So the little boy was in the nursery, under the nursery table, screaming and kicking it for all it was worth. And the only thing I could think to do in the moment was to go get under the table with him and scream and kick. And I did that. And it took a few seconds for him to register, like, why is this old guy doing this? And he looked over at me, and just a little bit of smile creased the corner of his mouth. And then a bigger one came, and we stopped kicking, and we stopped screaming, and he looked over at me. And I said, should we get up? He was like, yeah. And I had a really crystalline moment that so many people don't need me to preach to them. They just need me to join them in the moment. They're not making cosmic theological statements. They're talking to you about how they feel about their life in that moment. And that was needed. Christy came in. And she came in, as I have described her, with the biggest chip on her shoulder that I have ever seen. She was done with church, and she was sure as heck done with white male pastor types.
True story.
And I sensed in that moment that there was a lot there. And so I went up to her and I asked her to have coffee, which was the last thing that she expected me to do. And a year ago, we called and commissioned her as pastor of spiritual direction, which may not mean anything in the greater pantheon of the world, but it means something in Searcy, Arkansas. Mm-hmm. I realized after I had a daughter, and I went to 1 Peter and carefully looked at what does submission mean. It's my belief that clearly there is mutual submission. Nobody gets their way all the time. That's just a figment of our imaginations. And I wasn't going to raise this kid to wait for a man to tell her she was okay. Mm-hmm. I wasn't going to do that. And so it's been very important. It's been very important as we have trans people and we have gay people and we have divorced people and we have every category of person, for them to know that if what they need is the pastor to get under the table and kick and scream, then the pastor will get under the table and kick and scream. And that has renewed my vision of what the kingdom is. And it has revitalized. We have a young man in our outsiders group, and when he came out to his mother as gay, she vomited on him. And he said in that meeting, it's okay. And I waited for a minute and I said, can I say something as a parent? It's not okay. I know what you mean is it will be okay. But can you hear a dad's heart just for a minute to say no? You are God's beautiful child. Not some used up piece of rubbish. And I think the kingdom, if I understand the kingdom at all, and the kingdom I will serve in gladly, is a place where lives are redeemed and a vision of wholeness is present. And we don't kid ourselves about I'm greater than you, because when you come to our church, you come to a place where one pastor has a nose ring, they're both divorced, and there's a place for you. Mm-hmm. And that has renewed my belief in, I'm hesitant to use the word church, but church.
I think that's why I ended up landing in spiritual direction, because I spent so many years deconstructing with nobody to hold space for me. Mm. I was just floundering. Yeah. And I got to a place where I was so tired of shedding, I wanted to start adding back in. I told my spiritual director when the first time we met together, I said, I felt like I'm just paddling around in mud. I know what I don't believe anymore, but I don't know how to replace that with something positive. And, that is an important thing, especially in Arkansas, in the largely Baptist Church of Christ, whatever, South. There's, as he said, there's not a lot of room for questions. And having someone who can be a container for those questions, who can not be repulsed or tell you that you're going to hell, or doesn't look at you any differently at the end of the day because you have these questions, is a very, very important thing in my mind, because I would have given anything for that at that point. And it has been invaluable to me to have someone that will hold my questions and let me wrestle with God in a safe space. And I don't know that I would be that if it weren't for what FCC was for me, a safe place to heal. And,
yeah. That's really beautiful. The language of baby in bathwater raises for me something that I've come to realize over the years talking with students about, and something that my teachers told me, and I didn't quite understand when they told me that there's no kernel. They would always say, if we're looking to peel back the husk, all the accretions, and find the pure kernel of the gospel, as reform movements do over and over again, right? Okay, we're going to get rid of all the stuff. We're going to get back to the true New Testament church, the true kernel.
Sure.
And my teachers would tell me there's no kernel there. And I didn't really understand that until I got to students telling me, well, if you don't, every Christian has to believe X, or else it doesn't count as a Christian.
Right.
And I started thinking, if you made all those Venn diagrams, you wouldn't find any place where they all intersect. And I think that relates to our discussion here, because for a lot of people, sexuality and a particular teaching about sexuality is a sine qua non for Christian identity. And so you either accede to it, or you forfeit the right to be called Christian. And I have a lot of fun with students who say, you say you're a Christian, but you don't, and I'll say one of my many heretical things, which is I don't believe in a compensatory afterlife. I believe in the resurrection of the body. I'm all about that. But I don't believe in a personal subjectivity living on for eternity. And students look at me and say, well, that's the whole point of Christianity. What, right?
Yeah.
And I said, well, to me, that's a really sad statement if you think the whole point of Christianity is, as our founding director used to say, to get your soul into orbit.
Right.
That's really sad if you think that's what Christianity is for. And if it's not what Christianity is for, then is it really the kernel, right? The thing that all Christians have to believe. And as soon as you start reading around, you realize you're never going to find those even the things that seem most basic to everyone at first blush. You're never going to find that place where they've been died. So what's the baby and what's the bathwater?
Right.
Yeah.
You can't tell.
Right.
Yeah.
And I think the baby is not some kind of article of faith, right? The baby is not some kind of belief. I tell people I get to call myself a Christian because I try to follow Christ.
Right.
Yeah.
And that's very different from
Right.
saying I believe something about XYZ.
Or over-identify with, well, I'm a Christian because I'm a Baptist, or I'm a Christian because I'm Church
set
of
of
Christ.
doctrine.
Right. And what they mean by that, right, is, well, I adhere to this as opposed to this other group, which doesn't get it right. And so because I'm here, and I was listening to a student recently talking about their family, they left one church to go to another church because the pastor got fired. They left one church to go to another church because they changed the Articles of Constitution, and adhering to that set of beliefs, at least as I understand that now. The problem for me in my life was that we were changing those. So we were completely against divorce until an elder's child got divorced, and our policy softened. And I was, I don't know, maybe an early teenager at the time, and that I was confused by our softening on that position, because at that time I would have said that it was adhering to this certain set of doctrines, and we seem to be changing the list. So I think that's relevant to the conversation. I think for a lot of the young people that we work with, it's a really big deal. I've got a friend my age who went to Harding, and he's gay and lives in another state, and he wants to go to church. Well, there's no Church of Christ in the area he can go to. Well, he's got a lovely Episcopal church right around the corner. And I walked around and met the not pastor. What do you call the
priest or
vicar? Yeah, right. And I met them, and so I suggested to him he go there, and he said, "Well, I can't go there." I said, "No, it's fine. They're okay. You're gay. They know that." That's not why I can't go there. Oh, okay. He said, they use instrumental music.
Yes. Yeah.
I waited for him to laugh. He didn't laugh. Like this was...
That really was.
That was the sticking point
Yes.
because that set of doctrine, they didn't fit that. And even though he didn't fit it, the juxtaposition of that did not strike him because he was still trying to fit that mold.